Hello, everyone, and thank you for having me speak here today, and welcome everybody to the Newfoundland.Gold Virtual Investor Day Conferences. And so it's really a pleasure and honor to be kicking this thing off with a keynote speech for everyone about a little bit about our company, Newfound Gold, and a bit of our story, as well as to talk to just what's been so absolutely exciting and thrilling to be a part of, which is a discovery boom in Newfoundland. So a bit about Newfoundland. Gold has been being explored for here in Newfoundland for quite some time, well over a century, both being mined and explored for. But for the last century, for the most part, companies were precluded from really exploring from gold. There was a concession-based system, and I'll try to summarize this quickly. But the concession-based system ended up with a lot of companies having, or a very few, number of companies having very large land packages. And then in came this Mineral Impost Act in the early 90s, which started to force these very large companies to shed ground and spend exploration monies on their ground. And again, this in the Canadian landscape, another important thing happened around that time too, which was flow through. So we started seeing small companies actually explore, and speculative investment from retail fly into mining discovery plays. Before that, a lot of discoveries were made by major companies. And so you kind of had both of these things happening to Newfoundland, and it was really immature in terms of its prospecting community and all that sort of thing. So you had a bit of an explosion of prospecting, which was quite niche around in the latter part of the 90s. And then heading into the last cycle, I hate to say, there was a big misnomer about Newfoundland, which was that discoveries, or gold particularly in the province, was small, potty, difficult to stitch together. And this is sort of a plague of the Maritimes, I think, in general, but it really founded off of little scientific basis. It's really one was just because, well, of course, if you're looking in an area that is metalliferous and endowed with metal content, whether it be gold or anything, the first thing you're going to find is small smoky bits before you find the big deposits. And so it should be really encouraging that there's a lot of smaller potty types of things there. That should make you believe that there's quite a bit of gold-bearing fluid being injected in the system, and there might be a mother lode in there somewhere. And so we were sort of a bit contrarian with our approach when looking at the Maritimes. Based on the trends we saw in the last cycle, Colin and I both agreed over a beer that the best place, the best types of assets to go after were really tier one jurisdiction, district scale plays. And so if you look at some of the other tier one jurisdictions in North America, there wasn't really, there was a lot of claim saturation and project saturation. There wasn't a lot of opportunity the way there was here in Newfoundland. Now, there's a few other things that made Newfoundland compelling. It has a tremendous workforce that works abroad, very skilled labor, relatively cheap in the grand scheme of things. Environmentally speaking, they're very pro-business and pro-job, so it's a great place and should be an amenable place to secure permits, etc. But moreover, geologically, there was just this tremendous opportunity to stitch together what we thought was really compelling and really meaningful. So I'll just skip to a couple of slides here for everyone's benefit. If you can stick with me, we've got a little bit about the genesis of this area. So this is actually a map that shows the continental collision margin between the African plate and the North American plate. Once upon a time, there was an ocean here called the Iapetus Ocean, and it was closed up because continents move and they collide. And we can trace this collision front from Ireland all the way across the ocean, down through the Maritimes, and off the coast in Maine, and back on land again in the Carolinas in the United States. And so this is what we call a suture zone. It's a very deep-seated plumbing system that allowed for gold-bearing fluids to come up from the deep crust and from the mantle and migrate their way up into cracks and crevices and spaces to crystallize in the form of quartz veins and sometimes other deposit styles, but to form basically gold-bearing deposits. And so one of the big insights that we had when we looked at this was that the Dog Bay line, which was identified as the proper collision front, was in fact pretty much completely wide open when we came to Newfoundland. It also happened to be the largest cluster of prolific gold showings in the province, which we thought was really, really also compelling. Some notable discoveries made along this geological feature in the last cycle were Dalradian Gold, which is their deposit in Ireland, 6 million ounces and growing. We have Marathon Gold, which is 4 million ounces and growing, and Oceana Gold in and around the same in North Carolina. These were pretty big discoveries made in the last cycle, and so we're starting to see some geological attention fly into this macro picture. Now let's look at it a little bit from the side here. So I want to point everyone's attention to this diagram over here on the right. When you have two plates colliding, you end up with this crinkle effect. So you end up with like imagine two car crashes, cars crashing together. The hoods of the cars would crinkle up like an accordion. The same happens with rocks when they're crashing together, or pieces of crust. And what ends up happening is you get these big failures, these big breaks. And so we've got a couple of these low displacement accommodation faults that have come in, and we call them the Appleton fault zone and the JBP fault zone. And it's up these primary pipelines that the gold bearing fluids came from very deep and migrated their way up close to surface in placing gold. And so that's really what we were after. This was the theory that underpinned our attraction with the area. Now, just to speak to a bit of the landscape, one of the things that makes Newfoundland challenging, and one of the reasons why there's so much opportunity today, is that a lot of the province is covered with very thin glacial till cover. This is a thin layer of gravel that hides everything. There's very few outcrops in the central part of the island, even grading towards the coast. Newfoundland has a lot of hidden gems. And so one of the things that was attractive about us was in some of this gravel, we were getting tremendous amounts of gold and floats of quartz with visible gold in them. And that's some of the stuff that attracted us to the area. Also in the 90s, a company called Noranda had done a lot of regional exploration. They had huge swaths of ground, and they were trying to distill it down into the nuts and bolts of what they were going to keep. And luckily for us, this area happened to be one of the places they looked, and they found some really spectacular gold in both historic drilling, very reconnaissance level drilling, as well as trenching and float sampling, etc. And so just enough to sort of get our beaks wet and get us convinced that there's something much bigger here. Stitching this land package together, Newfoundland has a great online staking platform. It's been overhauled in the last couple of years. But you know, when we came in, it was online and it was really easy to do. And we could look at large scale geology and have a look at who the different land tenure holders were and how we were going to basically plan for our staking missions. One of the big undertakings we had to do is we had to stitch together this northern patchwork. And if everyone can see my cursor up in the northern portion of our project, you'll see a lot of different shapes and sizes in terms of claims that agglomerate to our larger claim package. And that's because we had about 16 different local prospectors that had dribs and drabs. Prospectors the likes of Alan Keats and his son Kevin and Peter Dimmel, who've been working with us to advance this through. And they've been there basically since its original discovery in the Noranda days. Once we kind of had the tiger by the tail and we had locked up the historic advanced work on the northern portion, we set our sights on the southern portion. And Sean Ryan, who I believe will be doing some address here in the coming days, also had staked our northern boundary almost to the coast. And this was really shocking to us because we were slowly pecking away at putting this all together and doing some staking and doing some work. And in comes Sean Ryan in the middle of the night, taking our northern boundary to the coast, which of course made it easier for me to justify explaining to our team that we wanted to be snapping up the rest of this belt before we could potentially lose it. So we ended up grabbing a absolutely tremendous land package. And we spent the better part of several years sharpening our axe. We were doing geophysical work, tremendous geophysical work, really modern type stuff, as well as geochemical works to advance our targets and give us some confidence in putting all this together and finding more. one of the big comparisons that we were making at the time, and we still do, of course, is with the Bendigo Gold Belt in Australia. This is the exact same type of gold belt that we're exploring here in central Newfoundland. So the rocks are exactly the same age. They're the same types of rocks: sandstone, siltstones, and shales. And we have a lot of the same structural environment. These two belts were formed the same way. The mining history are very different, however. In Victoria Goldfields, since 1850s, it's produced over 22 million ounces of high-grade gold, and some low-grade as well. But the beauty of that is that would be akin to, say, in Canada, what we see in Red Lake, which is a very prolific and area that we're all very confident in being a kind of a namesake and staple in the Canadian mining landscape. And here we have an analogous belt to what we see in Victoria Goldfields in Newfoundland, really in its infancy. So I'll switch to a couple of images specifically on our project that get us really excited. Let me just jump to some of this here. So here we have some of the historic workings from Noranda, as well as a lot of our work, and we've been able to find a few very compelling zones. The number one zone, the first one we checked, was really the Keats zone. Like everything else on this project, what got us excited about this zone was really just there was a lot of smoke. That's what got us here. That's what got us excited. When we first landed in Newfoundland to have a look at these rocks, to come and see this area, we saw hand sample after hand sample of beautiful specimen type visible gold. And to me, you couldn't have, as a geologist, you couldn't have an area with such widespread high-grade visible gold without having something substantial beneath your feet. There's a really good shot that there's an elephant in here somewhere. And so really that was what we set out to find. And that's what led us here. And so now what we've been doing is we've been exploring. The very first place we checked was Keats. We drilled underneath a bunch of historic reconnaissance Noranda holes, which were pretty low grade and really nothing to write home about, other than that they were very widespread low grade mineralization. And bang, eureka, under all of that smoke, there was this roaring fire. And today it's one of the most interesting, and I think it may be one of the most significant discoveries made in the Canadian landscape, if not the global landscape, for a very long time. The average width of mineralization that we've got so far out of our mineralized composites through the drilling has been in excess of 14 meters, and the average grade in excess of 25. Now that number may be a little dated since the last time we checked it, but that's really, we're onto something very, very serious and substantial. And it's helpful to notice that when we talk about all of this mineralization at Newfound Gold, specifically at the Keats zone, is it hangs together quite well. We've got a good handle on where it's going. We've got some pretty fascinating and tremendous results, and we know, and so far it just keeps going and going and going and going. And so we're pretty thrilled to continue to explore it. We also were lucky enough on our northern part of our project to find this Lotto zone. I mean, one of many zones we think will help hopefully lead to a culmination of zones that would be a very tremendous discovery. But here at Lotto, we've got some really compelling high grade, and we're super excited to continue to explore that and find more Keatses and find more Lottos after all. I'll show you a little bit about what this looks like. This is a zoom out of the Appleton North project. One question I get about Newfoundland is, often continuity. We talk about grade and nugget. We talk about also the fact that, there really isn't a lot of exploration historically done in this area. And Newfound Gold has this massive land package. But, the reality is that the magnitude of this land package is really lost on a lot of people. A lot of questions about our market cap, $1.4 billion. How could a company with such a discovery and so early in its life cycle have such a high valuation? And the reality is that we have on this map 7.8 kilometers of high-grade superficial gold along the Appleton Fault Zone. The Keats is really just a pinprick. This is what everybody's been getting excited about, as well as Lotto. There's going to be several others, we think. We don't know this for sure, but it's almost impossible to have such a prolific big footprint of high-grade superficial gold without having other zones like Keats elsewhere within this 7.8 kilometer stretch. Similarly, we have high grade spattered across 12.4 kilometers, only 5 kilometers east along the JBP fault zone. So this is something else that we think, somewhere in here, there's probably some Keatses. We just don't know exactly where. We've done a lot of homework to try to figure that out. And we feel confident with the current drill program that we're going to bite into at least a few of them. Just to kind of broaden the perspective about our valuation and the company, that what I've just shown you, this 7.8 kilometers, is really limited to this little part up here on the northern portion of our land package, as well as that 12.4 kilometers on JBP along the northern portion. We have both of these things mineralized at surface with soil anomalies, float sampled gold, etc., showings for 70 kilometers each to the south. Very, very big systems. We're not looking for one mine. We're looking for multiple mines. This is a project, a property package, a district that can host many different mines, many different shapes and sizes and mineralization styles. And so we're really only at the cusp of what could be a very tremendous discovery in the landscape. And thankfully for us, there's a lot of other companies in our midst, around us, and our neighbors that have also quite compelling things. And I think overall, in the storyboard that is discovery in Newfoundland, gold discovery in Newfoundland, we're really just at the start, because now, thankfully, a lot of investors are starting to recognize that there is really a bottomless pit of potential here, and all somebody has to do is look. One of the interesting things that we talk about with the style of mineralization that we get here in Newfoundland is that a lot of the gold is similar to what we see at Fosterville and Swan Zone. We have to remember, this was one of the most profitable mines, gold mines the world's ever seen. It was spitting out an incredible amount of free cash flow because it had incredible grade. And grade is really, really important for the resilience and the profitability of a mine. We know that grade is often variable, and whether you go to Fosterville or whether you go to Red Lake or any other orogenic camp, when you're into high-grade systems, there's a huge amount of nuggets. Sometimes you get these treasure boxes or jewelry boxes. In the case of Fosterville in the Swan Zone, they had a really big, long one. And the reason why this was allowed to, or this formed, this system at Fosterville, is because of it's an epizonal style deposit. And what the epizonal means is that it's an orogenic deposit. When those gold-bearing fluids came up from super deep, they got emplaced really, they emplaced their gold really, really shallow, close to surface, in brittle rock regimes. And pressure and temperature drops off a cliff as these hot, boiling gold-bearing fluids migrated up, and all of a sudden, bang, like an explosion, they pop, they drop all of their gold in these spectacular high-grade deposits. And so most of the time when we look at orogenic belts around the world, these types of zones, these epizonal horizons, have been eroded off. And so if we look in other Archean type of gold environments like Timmins and Kirkland Lake and Red Lake, we're now looking in the mesozonal horizon, something a little deeper. That epizonal part scraped off it gone a long time ago. Here we have it preserved. And so that's really crazy. And at Fosterville, they had it too. So one of the interesting things when we look at our rocks versus the Fosterville rocks, we see the same mineralogy. We see the same types of vein textures. We see a lot of the bizarre accessory minerals we're getting. Vugginess. Dr. Quinton Henne came to our project, had a look at our core, and one of the first things he noticed was one of the features that had us all scratching our heads was that our quartz veins were full of these little pits and cavities and vugs. And so if you look at our core versus on the left and Fosterville's core side by side on the right, you can see the very same little pits and cavities and vugs. Again, a telltale sign that we're in this epizonal type of regime. And over here on the right, we get this fine-grained, beautiful, disseminated visible gold. And we have it, and they have it at Fosterville. So there's a lot of chips stacking up to create this analog between the Bendigo rocks, the Victoria Goldfields in Australia, and the Central Gold Belt in Newfoundland. The rocks are the same age. The rocks are the same types of rocks. We get a lot of the same accessory, bizarre minerals. And we get a lot of the same veining textures and stuff. And now, thanks to our discovery, we're seeing a lot of the same grades that we can get in these treasure boxes, much like they see over in treasure boxes in their belt. So if anything's the same, if all these other things are the same, it means that there's a lot of gold left to be found in the entirety of Newfoundland. We're very excited to play a role in discovering what we've discovered and hopefully more, and attracting other companies to do the same, and attract more investors into this space to basically take a chance with us in peeking under the lid of Newfoundland and seeing really what could be below. So thank you very, very much for inviting me to speak at the conference. I hope everybody enjoys what they see, and all of the other talks from the other people. And so thank you very, very much.